So we're here obviously to check out an electric bus. We have one of the manufacturers here with us, Proterra, and for us I just want to share a couple of things. Our city's very interested in electric buses. We obviously have had some experiences in the past working with these, and we can field some questions about that, but I want to be kind of clear what we're looking at and what's feasible in the near term. We're very interested in electric buses for our 40-foot fleet, right? So this is sort of your everyday run-of-the-mill bus all over town. And that's what this particular vehicle would meet most of those needs. And we phase in our bus replacement every year or every 2 years anyway. And so we're looking at electric buses as part of our general replacement efforts. So sort of the idea is we can start phasing in electric over time. And you'll know we're trying to look at this too in our city fleet vehicles, as well as some compressed natural gas for our trash trucks, for our solid waste vehicles. But today we're here looking at one of the bus options that we've got, and a couple of things about this, just straight kind of off. These are 40-foot buses, they're not 60-foot, they're not articulated, so these are not relevant for the ART route. I'm sure folks are going to ask about that. Nor is a bus available that's electric that meets all the specifications. So none of that has changed in the short term. So again, we can take questions on that if you want, but this is really about our 40-foot fleet. And the good news is there are a number of companies that actually do produce electric buses that are 40-foot, and now that we do have some charging infrastructure in place, we think we can begin phasing them in over time. And so that's why we're here today. And I do want to laughably do one thing. Just in fairness, we want to also mention that there are other bus manufacturers of electric buses, including New Flyer and Gillard Cummins. So we're just noting there are other companies too that we're talking to. Okay, with more on this, our COO, Lawrence Royale.
I'm not sure if you guys can hear me if I'm not mic'd up, but the point is that I think, as the mayor indicated, look, part of the future of transportation, public transportation, is looking at alternative fuels. In this particular case, looking at electric buses is really part of the future of the city. And the majority of our buses right now that are on our city streets are 40-foot buses. And so we've asked companies like Proterra and others to come through New Mexico as they're delivering buses and or going to shows, etc., to let us see what's available out in the market so that we can make a real informed decision once we start replacing and going into a replacement process. The interesting things about the bus technology, especially in the electric area, is that the batteries keep getting better and better. Every manufacturer has a different system and a different way of configuring the propulsion system. But the beauty of this system in particular is that the actual charging units are universal, in that many other bus manufacturers can use this system if we were to maybe move in this direction. So again, learning about it, but also seeing what's the availability, etc. And then the last thing I would add is that we have a lot of our routes are circulator routes within the transit system. So we're not looking at this bus in particular to be, or an electric bus, to be the end all of our routes, but integrating it into what we do, into the routes where it makes sense, really helps us move into a more sustainable operation. And that's not only good for the city's transit system, but it's good for our environment. And that's the key, is that we want to make sure that we're planning for the future, in the future of the city. So with Bernie is our transit director, and Bernie will talk a little bit about the system and the bus.
Can you give us your first and last name, sir?
Bernie, and the last name is Toon.
And your title?
Transit director.
It's not a made-up name.
Yeah, right. Bernie, transit director. Well, as the mayor and Lawrence said, we're very interested in electric buses for the future. In fact, they are the future in transit all across the country, and everyone is taking a look at electric technology. We have a couple of edges here in Albuquerque coming out of the BYD experience, quite frankly, because although we couldn't use those buses on the ART route, our mechanics and our maintenance staff became extremely familiar with systems on electric buses. And so we've got a little pre-training, actually a lot of pre-training on electric propulsion systems, because our folks know so much about it, and our drivers have driven a lot of it, and our training drivers have driven a lot of it. The other piece is that electric brings sort of a new dimension to combined natural gas or any other low emission. You really literally have a zero emission vehicle when you do it. The applications, we're not sure where they are yet, but we do know that we can have some applications. It may make sense to sprinkle electric buses throughout several of the routes in the city. And one of the things that will happen about any effort when we eventually settle on a bus to buy, which is down the road a ways yet, but when we do settle on that, we'll be modeling the route just like we did the ART route. And so in terms of the application that we need for our specific use here in Albuquerque, we'll have a lot of data that will help us guide that decision.
Great. Yeah, why don't you at least do your name and title for the record?
I'm John Walsh. I'm the Senior Vice President with Proterra, and I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation to come out and just kind of do a one-day drive and ride. This is our 40-foot Pro Drive. It's a 4 battery pack bus. It has 440 kilowatts of energy on the bus. We are the oldest electric bus manufacturer in the U.S. We're based in San Francisco. That's where we make our batteries. And then we have 2 bus plants, one in Greenville, South Carolina, and one in Los Angeles in the City of Industry. So this is a 40-foot model. We make a 40-foot and a 35-foot model. And we're really glad to be here to work with the city, to do a lot of testing, put the buses on the routes, and see where it works the best. But happy to be here and happy to answer any questions about the product itself.
Great. So let me close with just a few thoughts and then we can take some questions. One thing to build a little bit upon what folks have mentioned, we are looking at this, recall the challenges for us with electric buses have to do with elevation, temperature, meaning it's really hot, and also the elevation in the hills, right, that we're in a valley. So as you can see from some of the issues around even bus size and battery life, these are all things we're taking into consideration. So, for example, most of the electric buses begin at airports or at universities because, again, of that smaller route. And that's also why there's like 35-footers and things like this. So for us, it's about probably looking at the north-south routes because those don't involve hills, and then also seeing how we can engage them in other areas. So again, there's still like limited capabilities for what Albuquerque needs, which is very different than coastal cities in cities with more temperate climates. And so for us, it's a little bit harder to pull off electric buses, but we know that in the future, we are going to be able to. And so today is just about figuring out exactly how we can do that. All right, questions?
Can you just give us an update on the ART project? Because you just talked about diesel buses in the meantime until you finally get your electric buses.
Yeah, so it still is remains to be the case that there are no alternative buses that will actually meet the specs for the route other than clean diesel. That is the best technology available, and right now, today, the only technology available that we could get within several years. So those buses actually we're still on track for a sort of winter rollout. We believe we might have the demo bus out here in May or June. And so we're going to give a full ART update, hopefully with the demo bus. And so kind of stay tuned for that, but that's the current game plan. Yeah.
And are you done with the BYD, or is that cost paid off and we're done with it?
So we're in, of course, we sued them and we've been in actually productive negotiations with them on a settlement. And those have actually been going pretty good, and so we are hopefully almost done with that. But until we are, we're not really allowed to talk about the details of that. But we want to look forward and really put that behind us, and I think they do too. And so hopefully we'll be able to do that officially soon.
So will you guys already start sprinkling in, I know you guys are talking to other companies too, but using these electric buses and then kind of making a decision after that?
The first priority is to get ART up and running, but now that we're getting closer towards winter, it sounds hard to say that, but that's roughly 9 to 12 months away, depending on how you want to look at it. We want to focus on getting that up and running, working through the kinks with respect to that, and then once we kind of get a good feel for that, as part of our replacement, we very much want to look to electric buses.
Sure, yeah, and we also have a lot of options to sort of take a look at this particular technology going forward, because all of the companies who are building electric buses are very competitive. and they're technology companies in addition to being bus companies. And so you can now lease buses. You can now lease batteries for 12 years, which is the average life of a bus. So there are a lot of different options emerging that would enable us with a manufacturer to basically sort of try some buses on trial and perhaps lease or have some other type of arrangement. And that's ideal because you don't have the total operating costs over 12 years necessarily, and you can try things out in different spots to see how the testing actually matches up with your modeling data.
And the goal is to go 100% electric, not about art, just the ones that we were talking about earlier today at some point. Is that the end goal for you?
I think eventually every city should, and I believe actually most cities will, and I think we certainly want to be part of that. I think we've learned that we want to take one step at a time, not bite off more than we can chew, so we want to start down that path soon, with eventually being, at that 100% sustainable fleet. But there's technology things in the way of that, the procurement code, it's going to be a long road, but I'm actually confident we'll get there.
Can you kind of explain maybe the difference between like this electric bus versus the ones needed for ART?
Sure, I'll maybe do that at a high level and then some of the experts can fill in some of the details. So I would break it down into a couple of different categories. The first one is the size of the bus. Our route was designed and spec'd for a 60-foot articulated bus with doors on both sides. These are currently, that alone is very different than this bus, right? Doors are on one side and it's shorter. The other thing is the height. So the height has to be specific to our stops. We were asking, that's why we had them raise and lower the bus. The height wouldn't actually work on our route. But the biggest thing is the battery life. We needed 175 miles per charge, and that was always the issue with the old company, is they could never really meet that. And I think what we mutually discovered is that right now I'm not sure if it's technologically possible to actually do that with a 60-foot articulated bus in our temperature and with our hills. And so that's why we're looking at a much different proposal, for a 40-foot street bus.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Those are all the obvious issues. I think the last one I would just say is that is the issue the mayor first pointed out, which is the terrain that these buses travel for the ARC corridor and the differences in temperature, especially in the summers when you have to have air conditioning on in the buses. That reduces the battery life significantly. And the testing of the buses before created that, or gave us that information. So there are very differences in the corridor for sure.
Yeah. So with those challenges and like the specifics, do you foresee the cost of ART going up because you're trying to find something so specific?
No, actually, we
actually brought it down.
Yeah, it actually brought it down. The actual cost of the buses that we are in the process of procuring are actually a lot cheaper than the electric buses that were first procured through the electric buses. So we're actually going to be in a better position.
So like even after, you'll have diesel buses for a while, but would you go back to electric at some point?
That sort of remains to be seen in terms of where the technology develops and how it evolves. There's still the challenges, as we just even with this particular bus, that it is different terrain. It's the 9-mile corridor. You're going up and down the valley, and those are the challenges that we have. We're looking at these buses for specific routes, maybe the north-south routes where it's a lot flatter. That may work better for this. So it all depends on how the technology on the batteries evolve in the future and how far they can go on the charge. Important to know that, as the mayor and we said earlier, we are changing the fleet out as the fleet matures and the current buses that we have need to be replaced. So I would not be surprised that within the next 2 or 3 years that we don't have a procurement for replacing some of those older buses. But that happens as each of these buses, transitions, and maybe at that point we may be looking at something like this, but that's still.
Back to these buses. Obviously 100% electric, it helps with the environment. But is there also like a cost effectiveness in terms of not having to pay for the fuel?
So if you want to add in, you probably have that analysis off the top of your head.
Yeah, I do. It's much cheaper on the total cost of ownership of an electric bus versus a fossil fuel bus, and it's in maintenance and it's in fuel. So for instance, a diesel bus would get 3 or 4 miles per gallon. This is going to get 25 miles per gallon equivalent because it's in kilowatts. So depending on what the situation is with the public utility in town, which I'm sure you have a good relationship
We
with.
still have to pay them though.
You still have to pay
you
them.
have to buy electricity.
But
just like you have to buy
we don't
gas.
like to get in exact numbers because every system and every property is different. But it usually ranges between $300,000 to $400,000 over the life of the vehicle. So, and one other point I'll make is with Albuquerque and where they're at in the process, they're right on track. Most of what we're doing in every city right now are pilots, and our largest fleet is Foothill Transit, and they're probably 35 buses in their total fleet. So they're at the right spot. I think testing is important, and we're doing pilots. We have 98 customers right now, so we're doing a lot of pilots, but I think they're in exactly the right spot to pick a bus that works on a specific route. So I think they're in the right spot.
Yeah.
Does that help you with
Yeah,
the
that
total
was-
cost of ownership question?
All right, anything else? I'll just add in one in case it's helpful. There's a good analogy that is very simple, so I don't want to insult the scientists with this one, but if you think about a golf cart, a battery-powered golf cart, driving it up and down hills, how all of a sudden you can't get up the hill very fast and it drains the battery faster, that's actually not that dissimilar to the issue we have with the ART route electric buses. So I don't know if that helps, but that's one way to explain it.
And I think the other piece of this I would end as well is that the interesting position that we find ourselves in is that we have the infrastructure in place at the Daytona facility as a result of the investment that was made for the ART system, i.e. for electric charging and for a charging facility. So when we make this transition, that infrastructure is in place already. And so that is the silver lining for what's happened over the last couple of years with ART, in that we now have at least the capability of really going into the systems because the electric systems are in place and the infrastructure is in place to move forward.
Thank
All right,
you.
thanks so much.
We had a